So I want you to think about a couple of things as we're going through this story today. How good of a friend are you? Are you easy to be around? Are you pleasant to be around? Do people enjoy your company? And then your enemies, or the people that you don't like. Do you wish them harm? Are you glad when bad things happen to them? And lastly, your leaders. Are you willing to trust that God has the ability to put people in leadership positions and take them out at His will? And that you just need to respect the person that is in the office at the time, regardless of whether you like them or you don't like them. Let God deal with it. Is that something that you can do? These are all things that we're going to be talking about today in our story as we find out that David has learned of Saul's death. And so let's just go ahead and get right into it. Now, if you remember, David had been living in the land of the Philistines because King Saul had been trying to kill him. Saul got jealous of David and how much the people loved him and how they thought he was such a good warrior. And it got in his head, and finally he's like, I just want to get rid of this guy. And at first he was kind of trying to do it secretly. And then eventually he's like, no, full fledged, getting an army, going after him. I want him dead. And so this has run David out of Israel, and he's living in the land of the Philistines. Now, the Philistine king of Gath, he believes that David has actually defected from his country of Israel and is fighting for them now. But he's not. He is actually fighting for the Israelites in the land of the Philistines. It's just so far away from the king of Gath that he doesn't know. But when all of the Philistines decided to go up north and fight against the Israelites over the Jezreel Valley, he, the king of Gath, asked David to come along with him because he thought that he really had turned away from the Israelites and he wanted him to fight with them. But whenever the other four kings of the land of the Philistines heard that David was coming, they didn't trust him. And they're like, no way, we don't want him here. And so the king of Gath sent him back to his hometown that he had given him in the southern part of the land of the Philistines, which was called Ziklag. But when David and his men got to Ziklag, they found that their whole town had been destroyed by the Amalekites, and they had carried away their women and children. And so David and his men went down, defeated the Amalekites, got their women and children, and brought them back to Ziklag. And after he had been there 3 days, a man came from the camp of the Israelites to David, and he was had his clothes torn and dirt on his head, which would be a sign of mourning. So before he even speaks to David, it's like, I am distraught. He's trying to display this to David. And then when he approaches David, he bows down to him in honor. And David looks at him and says, hey, where did you come from? And he said, I came from the camp of the Israelites. And he said, okay, what happened in the battle? And the man says, sadly, the Israelites are on the run, and many of them have died, including Saul and his son Jonathan. And David is like, how do you know this for certain? And he said, well, I happened to be on the mountain and saw Saul mortally wounded, and he called out to me and said, hey, I am about to die. Please put me out of my misery. And he said, I looked at him and there was no way he was going to survive from these wounds. And so I did. I killed him so that he didn't suffer. And look, I took his crown and I took the armlet that the soldiers would wear on their arm. And you can see that they do belong to the king. And he showed them to David. And this is not even true. This is not the true story, because we found out at the end of 1 Samuel that what actually happened to Saul is, yes, he was mortally wounded, and he did also ask that someone put him out of his misery, but it wasn't this guy. He asked his armor bearer to kill him, and he refused because he's like, there's no way I'm killing God's anointed king. And so Saul killed himself. It says that Saul fell on his own sword and killed himself. So apparently, this guy saw this happen, and instead of just relaying that information to David, he apparently thought David would be happy with the man who, killed the guy that was trying to kill him. And also, that he was being merciful to the king. It looks as if he is, benefiting both Saul and David by being merciful to Saul and by getting rid of the threat for David. And this guy's kind of been doing this the whole time because right when he approaches David, he looks as if he is mourning Saul. So that would be honorable to Saul. And then he bows down to David, honoring him. So he looks like he's honoring both kings, the old king and the one that he believes will be the new king. But really, he just seems to be seeking honor for himself because he's going to David, presumably because he thinks David will be proud of him for this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lied about it. And David senses this. He can tell that this man is not a good actor. He is actually kind of coming to him in a state of complete irreverence and disrespect. It's like he doesn't seem to have any regard for the fact that he just killed the king. Even though, yes, he's putting him out of his misery, he doesn't seem solemn about it. He displayed his solemnness whenever he was putting the ashes on his head and tearing his clothes. But his demeanor, once he begins to speak to David, is almost gossipy. It's like, this is what happened. Oh, listen, this is what happened in the battle, and he thinks that David is going to praise him. But David is distraught. It says, begins to cry. He tears his own clothes. He fasts, and he is just so upset for what has just happened to Israel's king, for what has happened to Saul and to his best friend, Jonathan. And so he is really confused as to why this guy would think that this is a good thing. And so he asks him, where are you from? Now, this man has already told him that he is an Amalekite. So what he really is asking is, where have you been living? You may have been from the Amalekite territory, but where have you been living that you would be fighting with the Israelites and not be aware of the fact that, as someone living amongst the Israelites, you are supposed to be going by their rules. You're supposed to know what God has chosen, which is this man to be the king. You also should know that I love Saul and I love Jonathan, and I would never be okay with this. I left the whole nation of Israel to keep from killing him myself because he was trying to kill me and I didn't want to have to kill him in self-defense. So I would never be okay with this. So how do you not know this? Where have you been all of this time? And the man says, well, I'm a nomad from the land of the Amalekites, and I've been living amongst the Israelites. And so David's like, yeah, well, then you should have known better. I don't know why you thought I would be happy about this, but this is not praiseworthy. You do not have the right attitude. And he ordered that he be executed. And the way that you are supposed to execute people, give them the death penalty for a murder case, is that there has to be 2 to 3 witnesses that say that the person did it. But no need for that here because the man himself came to tell that he did it. And so as David sentences him to death, he says, you brought this on yourself because you admittedly killed the king. This is not praiseworthy. This is something you should have never done. And so you're a murderer and I am sentencing you to death. After this, David writes a song Remember, David, that is what he's done his whole life. He was a shepherd of his father's sheep, and he had his heart out there, and he would play music and write songs. And then he was called to Saul's service in the very beginning to play for him, to lift his spirits with his music. And so David is a songwriter at heart. And so he writes a song for Saul and Jonathan and asked that this song be written in the book of Jasher for the Israelites to always remember the king, the very first king, and his son, and how they have fought valiantly and been good for the nation of Israel. And this book of Jasher, as far as we can tell, is a book of war songs. And so this is the song that David wrote. I'm going to read it. We're going to go through it, kind of stanza by stanza, and see what it is that he is singing about for this funeral song for in memory of David, of Saul and Jonathan. So this is 2 Samuel 1, beginning in verse 19. And he starts the song by saying, "Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places, how the mighty have fallen." And so he's just mourning what has happened to the nation of Israel, that their people were killed and their mighty men are gone. And then the next line, verse 20, says, "Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, let the daughters of the uncircumcised exult." And so the first thing that I want you to see is that he says everything twice in a different way. A lot of this is because this is a poem, a song, and so they do that sometimes. But also, it is to stress how important he feels these things are, and for sake of clarity. So when you say things a couple of times in different ways, you're saying, this is really important. I want you to get it. And I'm going to say it in a different way so that if you didn't understand it the first time, you'll understand it the second time. And so he says, don't tell Gath, which is, one of the Philistine cities, or publish it in the streets of Ashkelon, which is also a Philistine city. Basically, I wish that the people of the land of the Philistines could not say that they killed and got the Israelites on the run. This is not something that I want. Obviously, they already know this, but he's like, don't tell them. This song is not for them. I don't want them to know, to even be reminded that this has happened to them. And he uses these two cities because Gath is the easternmost city and Ashkelon is the westernmost city. And so he's basically using this to represent the whole of the land of the Philistines. So he's saying, I don't want the people living in the land of the Philistines to ever hear this song, because they don't need to be reminded that they've done this, because if they do, then the daughters of their daughters will rejoice and the daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. So saying that again in two different ways. They're going to be happy about this. I don't even want them to even remember that this happened. And then he curses the mountain that Saul and Jonathan died on. He says in verse 21, "You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, and no fields of offering." So he's like, no rain for you. I want everything on the mountain to die. You don't get to be blessed because my king died on you, on your land. And then he curses Saul's shield. He says, "For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil." And so he's saying it's defiled. It's basically useless because it didn't serve its purpose. The shield is supposed to protect Saul, but it did not do this. And so it's completely useless. And he's cursing it. And the oil is what they would use to clean the shield, but also to protect it. And so he's kind of using a play on words here, saying, that oil might have protected the shield, but the shield did not protect the person that it was supposed to. Therefore, it's defiled, it's useless, you're cursed too, you and the mountain. And then he turns his focus to Saul and Jonathan in verses 22 and 23. And he says, "From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty." So, first of all, they say that when they would use the words the blood and the fat together, this is representing the sacrifices. So, the blood that the people were not allowed to eat, they had to spill on the ground, and the fat that they had to burn to God, and they also weren't allowed to eat. Those were the things that were given up to God. And so, when they would use these things, they're talking about a sacrifice. And so, what he was trying to reiterate here is that Jonathan's bow hit the fat of these mighty warriors and killed them, and Saul's sword slain them and spilled their blood. And so he's saying both of these mighty warriors sacrificed many of God's enemies to him, offered them up to him before they died. So he's praising them as mighty warriors, which is very ironic because this is what Saul got jealous of David for in the first place, because initially Saul was a mighty warrior and everyone saw him as such, and they praised him for that. But then when he became the king and David began fighting for them, then the people started saying, Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. And this upset Saul and made him jealous of him. But David is like, no, you were a mighty warrior, And if Saul could have just accepted that David was fighting on his behalf and taken credit for it as the king, then everything would have been good. It's like, when I was fighting, then y'all were successful, and now I've got you this other guy, and he's fighting, and now we're successful. But Saul could never do that. But David isn't insulting him in return, saying, yeah, you aren't as good of a warrior as me. He's like, no, you were a good warrior, and the people should remember you as that. And so he goes on to say, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death you were not divided. They were swifter than eagles and stronger than lions. So you're fast, you're strong, you killed many. You are great, valiant warriors. And then he calls them beloved and lovely. So, beloved meaning people love you, and lovely meaning you're worthy of that love. You are lovable. And so, even though Saul has been trying to kill him, he's like, everyone loves you. I love you. And y'all are lovable people, both of you. You are going to be missed. And then he says, in life and in death, they were not divided. And you're kind of like, well, they kind of were divided, because Jonathan got very angry with Saul for wanting to try to kill David. And he stood up from the table and he refused to eat, and Saul threw something at him. They had this big fight. And then Jonathan left, let David escape. Saul knew that Jonathan had let David escape. And so they did have a rift. And so you're thinking, well, they were divided, but they weren't, because they didn't let that separate them. Even though they had arguments, they both just went their own way and did what they believed to be best, and then still were a family. And in life and in death, they were together because they were fighting unto the death together. And so he praises them as warriors. He praises them as a united family, and that it says that they are loved. And then he says in verse 24, you daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. So what he's trying to say is, mourn your king. mourn your king. He has made you a great nation. He has made you important and valuable. People look at you that way, and that's because of him. And so don't forget your first king. He's been great for your nation. And then he seemingly ends the song in the way that he started it in verse 25 by saying, how the mighty have fallen in the midst of this battle. Same as he said up there at the first, how the mighty have fallen. But then he's like, I can't end the song because I love Jonathan and I need one more little stanza just for him. And so he says, Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I'm distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. So, this word distressed literally means tight or constricted. And so, what he's trying to say is, it feels like the life is being squeezed out of me right now. I'm just so distraught about your death because you're my best friend. And we have had an extraordinary friendship. He seems to be saying that there is nothing negative about you for me. Everything has been pleasant about being your friend, and I miss you deeply. I wish that it would not have turned out like this. And then he says, your love even surpasses that of women. At first, you're like, what does that mean? But when he's saying that he's been pleasant to him and his love is extraordinary, I think he's saying, I've had difficulties in every other relationship, other relationships, which if you're married or in a relationship, you know that your relationships are not always pleasant. You can't say that about if you're a man, you cannot say that about your relationship with your wife. The women are not always pleasant. And sometimes they're difficult, sometimes they're dramatic, sometimes you have problems with them. And so he's saying, none of that with you. That's what I think he's saying here. Everything has been positive in my relationship with you, unlike any other relationship that I've ever had. And so then he ends the song by saying, how the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. And he's calling them the weapons of war. He's saying, the mighty people have fallen. Saul and Jonathan are dead. So as you can see, he's not happy. He's mourning Israel. He's mourning her king. He is mourning his best friend. And he writes this song out of love for them, puts it in the book of Jasher, and says, I want all of Israel to know this song and remember the first king fondly.